The road seemed to breathe that night. It wasn't the wind or the distant sound of tires cutting through the wet asphalt. It was something else, something alive. My name is Aidan, and although I'd heard stories from drivers about strange things on Scotland's motorways, I'd never believed them. Until that night. It was late, almost midnight, and I was on my way back from a wedding in Inverness. My stomach was still carrying the weight of the wedding cake, but my head was too light after a few beers. I took the A835, the quickest shortcut, to my house in Ullapool, and soon the silence began to take over the car. It was just me and the steady rumble of the engine cutting through the opaque darkness of the road. The night was thick. There were no stars. Not even the moon dared to appear. My car's headlights illuminated just enough to make the emptiness ahead even more frightening. Around me, the world seemed to have disappeared. There was only that narrow strip of tarmac and the unbroken shadows of the trees. That's when I saw the first strange thing. On the carriageway, a figure stood. She seemed to be wearing something like a white dress, but the fabric was dirty, almost grey. At first, I thought it was someone lost or injured. When I slowed down, my headlights caught something disturbing. Her face was turned towards the ground, and her hair fell like a veil that hid any human features. "Do you need help?" My voice sounded louder than it should have, filling the void, but the figure didn't move. Not a word, not a nod. It just stood there, shoulders bowed as if the weight of the world was on them. I should have left. God knows I should have kept driving, but something pulled me to stay, as if an invisible hand were gripping the steering wheel. For a moment, I thought I heard something on the radio. An interference, even though it was switched off. It was a high-pitched sound, like a distorted whisper, and then she looked at me. I can't describe exactly what I saw, because my memory refuses to form a clear image. All I remember is eyes that were too black, like wells that drained any light, any will to live. My heart raced, and my instincts finally screamed at me to get out of there. I stepped on the accelerator as if my life depended on it. The car roared, and the figure disappeared in the rearview mirror. But it wasn't the end. This was just the introduction. As I tried to control my breathing and the growing nausea, I noticed something in the back seat through the mirror. It wasn't possible. I was alone when I got out. So who was sitting there? A chill ran down my spine, and the temperature inside the car plummeted. Without thinking, I abruptly turned the steering wheel and stopped on the hard shoulder. When I looked back, nothing. The seat was empty. I laughed, but not with relief. It was the nervous laughter of someone trying to convince themselves that everything was fine. Even so, as I got back on the road, the feeling that I was being watched didn't leave me. Minutes later, my breathing still hadn't stabilized. I followed the road like a castaway, clinging to a piece of wood, aimlessly, just trying to survive. The headlights kept drawing that infinite tunnel in front of me, but it was as if something invisible lurked in the shadows. I switched on the radio, the automatic reflex of someone looking for a distraction. The hiss invaded the car like a sadistic whisper. I turned the dial, trying to find a station that worked, but all I heard was the same static, increasingly irregular, as if it had a life of its own. That's when a voice interrupted the noise. "Aidan!" My foot almost missed the accelerator. The voice was low, distant, but unmistakably human. Only it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from somewhere inside the car. "Who's there?" My voice came out thinner than I would have liked, but the silence answered like a solid wall. I looked in the rearview mirror, convinced I'd see something or someone new in the back seat. Still, the discomfort grew, like a weight on my Shoulders that wasn't physical but spiritual. Just when I thought I was getting paranoid, something crossed the road. I didn't have time to brake. I just felt the impact. The car shook violently. The sound of the bumper hitting flesh and bone echoed like thunder. With my heart in my mouth, I parked on the hard shoulder and got out. The night seemed even colder. Outside, my feet sank into the damp ground as I circled the car. The bonnet was dented, but there was no blood. No sign of fur or flesh, as you'd expect if you'd hit an animal. Then I heard it again. Aidan. The voice was closer now, almost in my ear. I turned round, panic blinding me, but there was no one there. The road was empty. The surrounding forest a wall of darkness and mystery. Only the sound of leaves moving in the wind filled the air. But there was something wrong with even that. They seemed to be whispering my name. Taking a quick breath, I returned to the car, locking the doors as soon as I sat down. The security of 4 locked doors was a fragile illusion, but it was what I had. I reached for my mobile phone, desperate for some kind of connection with the real world. No signal. That's when I felt it again. The temperature dropped as if the car was parked inside an ice cave. My breath came out in little clouds of vapor, and before I could react, the driver's side window fogged up. Before my eyes, an invisible hand began to write on the cold glass. Letters appeared one by one, slowly, as if engraved by something that didn't want to be ignored. Back. My hands trembled as I shifted into gear and floored the accelerator, ignoring the warning. The road seemed to conspire against me. Curves that were once familiar now seemed designed to lose me. For a second, I thought I was driving in circles. It was as if the road had no end. Then, in the distance, I saw lights, a pub, or a bus stop, perhaps. Hope glimmered for a moment, however faintly. It wasn't the kind of place I would normally stop. But in that situation, anything was better than being alone. The car slowed down, and I turned in the direction of the lights. What I didn't realize was that by crossing that threshold, I was taking the first step into something much bigger than I could ever have imagined. When the tires touched the uneven ground of the car park, the world seemed to hold its breath. The place was nothing more than an old petrol station with a makeshift bar next to it. A neon sign flashed lazily, emitting a monotonous hum that cut through the silence of the night. "Open 24H, the sign said, but it was hard to believe that anything there was really alive. I got out of the car hesitantly, like someone stepping onto unfamiliar ground. The dim light from the sign illuminated little more than enough to show the cracks in the tarmac and the bar's peeling walls. Yet something seemed different about the place. It wasn't just old. It was as if it had been forgotten by time, a piece of reality that the world had decided to abandon. The wooden door creaked as if to let the atmosphere know that someone had entered. Inside, the smell was a mixture of oil, cigarettes, and a metallic touch that I couldn't identify. There was no music, just the sound of a small television in the corner, transmitting static as if it were part of the furniture. "Can I help you?" The voice snapped me out of my thoughts. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with a tired face and deep-set eyes watched me. Her name was embroidered on her uniform, June. She looked like she'd stepped out of one of those old films that play in the early hours of the morning. But something in her expression told me that she was as trapped in that place as I felt. "Need help! My car!" I began to explain, but the words got stuck in my throat. I felt a weight on the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. I looked around and saw that there were other people in the pub, but none of them looked really normal. A man in the corner was stirring a cup of coffee, as if hypnotized. A woman sitting by the window kept her eyes fixed on the emptiness, while Her fingers drummed to a tune that nobody heard. But the worst thing was the boy in the background. With his back to me, he didn't do anything. He just stood there, motionless, like a shadow that had taken shape. "Are you all right?" June asked, now with a tone of concern in her voice. I nodded quickly, trying to stay calm. "I need a phone or something to help me get back on the road." She pointed to a payphone attached to the wall near the exit. It was an old disc, model, the kind you don't see anywhere anymore. I walked over to it, but the feeling that I was being watched didn't leave me. I picked up the handset and dialed, not knowing exactly who to call. But before I could complete the number, the static from the phone turned into a low whisper, like a secret that wasn't meant to be heard. "Come back." I dropped the handset, as if I'd been shocked. I looked at June, who seemed distracted by something behind the counter. The television was still broadcasting the same static. The people around seemed frozen in time, as if they were waiting for something that would never come. It was then that I realized. The lights in the bar began to flicker, following the same pattern as the sign outside. Something didn't want me to be there. "You have to go now," said June, her voice low, almost as if she was afraid of being overheard. Her eyes, however, told me more. It wasn't a warning. It was a desperate plea, not knowing what else to do. I ran for the door. Outside, the car was exactly where I'd left it. But something was wrong. The windows were completely fogged up, as if someone or something had been inside while I was away. My hands were shaking as I opened the car door. The air inside was heavy, dense, as if something had really breathed in that space. The windows were still fogged up, and the feeling of being watched grew like a wave about to break. There was no time to think. I started the car. The engine coughed, once, twice, before starting. The headlights illuminated the empty station, and for the first time, I realized something I should have noticed before. There was no road ahead, just an empty field dissolving into darkness. But how had I got there? The engine rumbled. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't need to look in the rearview mirror to know that someone or something was standing there. The sensation was unmistakable. The pressure on the back of my neck, the icy air running down my spine. Even so, I turned slowly, knowing I shouldn't have. He was there, the boy from the pub, but now closer. His eyes were two black holes, sucking in all the light around them. His mouth didn't move, but I could hear a voice, grave, ancient. It seemed to come from everywhere. Should never have stopped. I swallowed. The words seemed to cling to my chest like sharp claws. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. I pressed down on the accelerator, and the car took off. It felt like the vehicle was struggling to move forward, as if something invisible was holding the wheels. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the boy was no longer there, but neither was the petrol station. Everything around me was an endless darkness, broken only by the headlights. There were no signs, no trees, nothing to indicate that I was still in the real world. Then the car radio switched itself on, squawking a familiar static. For a moment I thought it was just another whisper, but it was my own voice, recorded. "You should never have stopped." The road ahead crumbled, and the car began to fall, as if the ground had disappeared beneath the wheels. My heart raced. Everything around was a complete void. If I'm telling you this, maybe you still have a choice. Never stop when you're alone on the road. Oh, and before you go, take the opportunity to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment. You might not get another chance.